Preparazione.
Siamo live, giusto?
Adesso sì.
Ok.
No, ti prego.
Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you. I was hoping to be in Belmonte today, but it's not the case. And thank you for hosting me, and thank you to all of our guests to participate to this roundtable, which follows, let's say, a topic that I and we've been working on since last year's at Crossings in Belmonte. While last year, Radical Care concentrated more on, let's say, the field of architecture, the idea this year is to expand the conversation, let's say, towards practices, associations, and of course also theorists that work with the topic of care. And the idea is to try to understand how these practices and association work in the territory, and how, let's say, what are the differences in the interpretation of the term care, which in our case has been, let's say, anticipated in the title by Radical, which refers to specific values, political and politically speaking, and also for what when it comes to social issues or sustainability issues. And of course, when I say sustainability, I'm talking not only, let's say, on the environmental side, but I'm talking about, let's say, on the social side. So I'd like, maybe Rita wants to say a few words before we start with the conversation. And how is it going at Crossing this year?
Well, this is the last days of 10. We started, this is a sort of different version because we never did it in September usually, but it was a series of reasons, and so it's been interesting. As usual, we had 3 workshops, and was one architecture, one communication, and one process, which is part of the, let's say, this roundtable kind of main theme. And this is our second roundtable. We will have another one this afternoon about communication. And with architecture, we continue to work in the casa, but this time going outside, starting to go back to the public space, and we create this. So we, with Rivoluzionde, there was the garden where we are now was reactivated in these 5 days, while with the communication with we prototype an app that would hopefully will be launched as soon as we find the resources. And then we had this, both the communication was run by the Seppie, while for the first time we had a guest, which is Roberto Alfano, that coordinates the process workshop that was more going around the village and meeting people and knowing the stories and trying to start to collect the stories and understanding better the different layer of the place that we now live in a full time, because Crossing usually was a moment for the temporary community to meet in Belmonte, but since COVID we moved here. I mean, most of us moved and most of us come back quite often, and this has changed a lot also the relationship with the village, obviously. So yeah, thank you.
My microphone. So we invited here 2 associations. Sento un po' di eco, ragazzi. We invited 2 associations in particular, which are working into very specific context, which is Stefano Cuzzocrea from ex-Convento, a local association that works in Belmonte Calabro since 20 years. And now Rossella Tricarico, who is representing the group of Manifatture Knos, which has been redeveloping a former, let's say, school in Lecce and opening it up for other association and giving space for, let's say, the larger community. So I would like to start with Stefano. So maybe he can introduce the activity that he's being, let's say, operating in Belmonte. And what I would like him and you all, of course, to highlight, which is the topic of our conversation, is what's the relationship with the local population, and how do you understand the idea of caring in your, let's say, everyday practice with the associations? Thank you.
If you prefer,
Grazie.
posso aiutarti se vuoi, se preferisci parlare in italiano, as you like.
Guarda, preferirei parlare in italiano per una questione, come dire, di stare accanto a quelli di Belmonte, no? Necessariamente dobbiamo anche arrivare a loro, quindi potrei, come dire, leggere la traduzione in inglese, però preferisco parlare in italiano.
Va benissimo. L'unica cosa per Catherine, chiedere magari appunto a Rita di... So Catherine, just Rita will continue with the translation, but Stefan, of course, says like this presentation has to arrive also to the local community. And so I'm sorry if I talk in Italian, but this is meant no disrespect. We will try to facilitate the communication.
Sì,
Thank you.
È un po', appunto, crea qualche disagio, ma credo che sia necessario appunto per avere questa doppia visuale, no? Che è quello che più o meno proviamo a fare, come dicevo prima. Quindi l'ex convento come progettualità è una progettualità che si è radicata appunto a Belmonte Calabro già dal 2001, quindi sono già 20 anni che l'associazione è attiva. Io sono dentro l'associazione da 10 anni circa, ed è un'esperienza trasversale, ci piace appunto definirci così, che ha sede a Belmonte Calabro, e le nostre progettualità ruotano intorno a un centro che è composto da un dentro, e questo è il teatro, la musica, l'ospitalità, le residenze artistiche, i progetti con le scuole, ed un fuori che è il territorio, inteso però come un sovrapporsi di natura, di progetti artistici, di persone e la loro conoscenza attraverso l'esplorazione. E l'ex convento forse è ancora isolato, ma non è solo.
The ex-convent started 2001, so it's 20 years that they are working in the territory in Belmonte. But Stefano, he moved to Belmonte only 8 years ago, and the action they do is they like to define them this action as transversal. So it's like one part of the project is focused on working within the inside, let's say, which means like their own artistic project, their collaboration with schools, their collaboration with theaters. And then there is an outside action, which is more related to the territory. So he said that the convent is isolated, but at the same time is not alone.
Yeah. Cioè faccio un salto temporale e arrivo al 2021. 2021 c'è, anzi mi proietto avanti, vado a ottobre addirittura. Dal 5 al 10 ottobre a Belmonte Calabro, quindi tra l'ex convento e la casa di Belmondo, accadrà per la quarta volta il progetto Rifugi d'Aria, che è un progetto, i primi 2 progetti sono stati Viaggio alla radice, una settimana di studi intorno ai TND Crew, e Rifugi d'Aria, questi progetti che l'associazione fece nel 2001. Quindi ritorniamo in qualche modo a 20 anni fa con Rifugi d'Aria, che quest'anno ha un tema che è il suono, la gola, la radice, e non più come nelle edizioni precedenti, Rifugi d'Aria a border, festa di comunità, perché ritengo che non siamo più nel tempo giusto per parlare del margine, per parlare della festa, perché la comunità in qualche modo, almeno in Italia, rispetto a alcune normative, la comunità è un po' messa in crisi rispetto alla sua capacità appunto di trovarsi e di ritrovarsi nello spazio pubblico. In qualche modo lo spazio pubblico ci è limitato e provano appunto a dividerci all'interno dello spazio pubblico. E quindi torniamo a un progetto che aveva nella sua origine appunto il solo nome RIfugitare, e questo mi sembra molto interessante per tracciare in qualche modo un resoconto per quello che è il lavoro. E quindi questo stare in ascolto rispetto a queste 3 suggestioni che sono il suono, la gola, la radice, insomma, credo che ci permetterà di lavorare ancora più rispetto a quella che è l'idea di comunità, che è una comunità, come si diceva anche per Crossing, anche per le Seppie, fatta sia di persone che stanno nel paese, ma anche di persone che arrivano da fuori e in quei giorni diventano anche il loro paese.
So he talked about the event or the next step of the ex Convento, which will be in October, and it's called the Rivoluzionde, which means hair refuge, and it's something that the first edition was actually 20 years ago, and now it's a sort of it's the 4th edition, but they kind of came back after 20 years with a different aim, because it's not anymore about what the theme that they're focusing. It's not anymore about the image. It's not anymore about the party or of the celebration of the party, because especially in this period after the pandemic in Italy, it's more than maybe, or no more, but it was very strong as well. The community is now in sort of critical moment, also because it's very difficult to live in to use the public places before. There are a lot of new regulations that are not allowed to leave it as before. So that's why the theme of this year are roots, sound, and throat. And because he thinks that they think that this could be a new way of exploring the sense of a community.
Ed è chiaramente anche il tempo giusto per provare a mettere in atto anche pratiche performative differenti nella propria modalità. Tra i vari ospiti ci saranno appunto delle azioni che andranno un po' a rompere lo schema, no? Di fruizione. Ci sarà un concerto dove si spera che ci si addormenti, no? Uno sleep concert, insomma, provare ad addormentarsi con il suono, stesi in chiesa, con dei plaid, dei cuscini, insomma, poi vediamo come ci si può organizzare. Cioè, provare a cogliere l'opportunità di questo momento per cambiare, non tutte ovviamente, però per andare appunto a fare un cambio, non dico radicale, però un piccolo cambio rispetto anche alla pratica performativa. Quindi utilizzare tutti i temi che in questo periodo ci stanno in qualche modo coinvolgendo e provare a ribaltarli per creare nuove modalità della messa in atto, dell'atto creativo, e nuove modalità di relazionarsi all'interno dell'atto creativo stesso, quindi tra partecipanti e performer. Si cercherà, nonostante tutto, di avere attività performative che coinvolgano nei modi e nei limiti che questo periodo ci impone il pubblico, che mi piace definire partecipanti più che spettatori.
He thinks it's also the time to try to have not a radical, but trying to have at least a change or a small change towards the performative arts. So also the way of being together, of experiencing an event could change. Like, for example, would be this concert that they're planning to organize in the church of the ex-convent, where the aim is to fall asleep. So staying in the church without on the floor with maybe pillow or whatever, that needs to be still like thought a bit better. But then the aim is really to maybe sleep, and how then we can experience this new way of almost being together after all this also time we are living in.
Boh,
I forgot
io
something.
mi fermerei qui.
Okay.
O ancora qualche minuto, non lo so.
Se vuoi procedere, hai qualche altro minuto, se
Ah,
c'era
ok, va bene,
qualcosa.
sì.
Sì, sì. Poi passiamo a
Eh,
Rossella, che sarà un bel confronto.
Sì, quindi diciamo, muovendoci appunto nell'immediato con questo progetto, in qualche modo cioè, è tornato un po' indietro provando a creare una piccola mappa rispetto a quello che è il tema, insomma, di questa giornata, cioè quali sono le pratiche di cura, no? Per le comunità. In questo caso cioè, che voi, insomma, voi dite il movimento, in questo caso cioè, cioè, mi sembra che per noi sia più legato invece un tema sulle diciamo micro comunità all'interno del paese o dei paesi intorno a Belmonte Calabro, che sono in questo caso le scuole, ad esempio, quindi andare a lavorare all'interno delle scuole o portare le scuole al convento, e in qualche modo quelle attività che coinvolgono il pubblico attraverso esperienze quali possono essere rassegne teatrali o progettualità, come dire, un po' disseminate nel territorio. Però mi ritrovo cioè, ad avere una difficoltà a parlare di questo tema perché effettivamente con le scuole non ci si lavora più da ormai 2 anni quasi e quindi cioè, tutte queste pratiche in questo momento cioè, non le conosco più in qualche modo, quindi almeno per noi è difficile e tornare ad essere attivi con queste modalità, cioè anche noi ci siamo in qualche modo ritirati, quindi non so dare suggerimenti sulle pratiche insomma, per le comunità in movimento.
He says that if we want to go back to, let's say, the theme that it's the theme of the day, of this roundtable, is about the care. For them, the care was always related to the, or anyway, pointed to the micro communities within the village. And these micro communities could be, for example, the schools that they've been working with going into the schools and also bringing the schools in the convent. Or, for example, the public that they used to work, or they're working with when they were doing theater performance. But at the moment, you feel a bit strange to talk about this micro community or caring of these micro communities, because since 2 years now they are not working anymore in that way. They're kind of, also them have been stepped back and changing them, or anyway ritirare, like go kind of stop to go back, stop to collaborate, to practice this care in the same way as before.
What I would, let's say that came to my mind while Stefano was talking is that there is a slight difference, let's say, between the radical care. If you take care, you would literally translate it in Italian as cura. But cura somehow has this implicit, let's say, I think so. I'm not a linguist, but my experience says that this might be a difference. If we talk about cura in Italian, we directly, let's say, associate the caring with a problem. Like there is a problem, so here's the cura in Italian. Of course, that is similar also in English, but I have a feeling that maybe Catherine can, let's say, contradict me in case, that caring, it's like also, let's say, a more diffuse and capillary, let's say, activity, that it's not like all the time related to a problem. or it's trying to work with, let's say, certain processes to, let's say, help them. So I was, I don't know if Catherine has anything to say about that, like if that makes sense in a way.
So if I understand you correctly, in Italian, the word that we would translate care for, there's an objective there. So there's a sort of solution,
Yeah.
or it's driven by some kind of problem that requires some kind of solution. So I think that in English, it is probably more diffuse, and the way that we use care is very capacious. So it's not, it's about care, it's caring about, which is, and caring for, and caring with, which is, you know, we take it from the political scientist Joan Tronto. So, and care in not a care in the world, you say in English. So it's also about it. There's also within care, not only the idea of about taking care of somebody, but there's also concern and also sorrow. So care is a very, very complex notion, even in English. And so I don't know in terms of the Italian whether it also encompasses sort of this idea of concern. I have not a care in the world, right? So what is that? How do you translate that into Italian?
Yeah, somehow, like, let's say the language also reflects some cultural aspects that we have to be aware of. So that's why this came to my mind, and I reacted to what also Stefano said. But I was curious to hear also the experience of Manifatture Knos and how it's working today, especially given, let's say, since we are talking about this specific moment, how is Manifatture Knos born? Like from which, let's say, ideas, from which kind of group with which practices they define in the years, and how it developed in the last years, and how it's going on right now, how you are handling, let's say, the situation in Lecce today.
Okay, in Italiano, inglese. I can speak in English or Italian, as you prefer.
Magari possiamo provare a scegliere qualcuno da voi che traduca per i local, se per voi va bene. Okay. So we can proceed in English?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Rossella from Manifatture Knos, that is a cultural center in the south of Italy, in Lecce. It was born in 2006, the organization, and it has been open to the people in 2007. So after 1 year of voluntary works from a group of citizens that need a space to make their own activities related to arts and sports and whatever. And so basically after several experiences inside the city, they had the need of a space, and they focused on this space that was a school for mechanics in the past till the end of the 80s. And then it has been abandoned for almost 20 years. So when they arrived, they found this space that it's very huge. It's 4,000 square meters. And inside it was raining because the glasses were completely broken. And then there was also, it was full of machines. So it was not possible to use it in a very quick time. So the strategy was to speak with the owner of the space, the province, and to find a solution in order to sell some machines and have the money to cover the expenses related to the rooftop repair maintenance. So after 1 year, they were able to open it to the city. And since then, Manifatture Knos is welcoming proposals from several organizations inside the city, also free citizens, a group of students, artists. So it's very various. It's a space that it's welcoming the diversity. And so the philosophy that is behind this center is to welcome, to leave space to indecision. That means to avoid of planning everything, to avoid an artistical direction, and so to make as much as possible people involved in the building of the cultural center. So actually with the COVID, for us it was a bit tricky to be open, because the law were saying that cultural center, social center, and whatever, they were forced to be closed. So we closed like in the end of October, and we were able to be open again in the end of May. And we tried to start again with the activities. And now we are going to be open, I hope, as much as possible in the next months, and to involve the city and to collect all the proposals from the city. Related to the philosophy of the center, we started to make this research on the public space, and we involved in this research Rick Clement, the landscape architect, that in 2012 it came to Lecce after an invitation, and with him we started to approach 3 different spaces in Lecce as tiered landscapes. So as spaces where nothing is completely planned, where there is a bit of abandon, and it's possible to welcome the biological diversity in terms of plants, but also in terms of activities that we are bringing there. The research stopped in 2 of the 3 places. One was on the coast, another one was in an abandoned quarry, and the other one was that is still going on, is the parking site close to Manifatture Knos. That is a huge square of 10,000 square meters. Actually, it's still a parking, but since 2014, we started to cut the asphalt and to plant new plants, but also to welcome the pioneers plants that are enriching the diversity of the garden. So the approach is to combine the experience of the cultural center in terms of management and programming and how to make it open as much as possible, and at the same time to develop a research that is more related to other spaces inside the city. And this research made us to realize different experiences in several cities. So we started in Palermo, then we were inside the Manifesta with Colocco, then we were in Matera during the Matera Capital Culture, and then in Lausanne, and now we are going to approach the neighborhood of Scampia in Naples. So basically, this is the practice that we started, in which we are still working.
And my question is also to you, Rossella. How is the team, let's say, what are the mix of competencies you have inside of the group as for Manifatture?
Inside the cultural center, we are actually, the situation is changing year by year, because we are just collecting the proposals from the cities. So actually there is a ciclofficina bike workshop, there is a bar, there are some theater companies that are using one of the space at Manifatture Knos. It's a room, because there is a huge open space, but also some different rooms around the open space. Then there is a community of climbers. There are also people working in agriculture, and they're making this market every week with the local food. And so yeah, inside the Manifatture, the situation is changing year by year in relationship to the needs of the city. related to the path of third space, and so the course, the experience that we are doing in the public space outside Manifatture Knos. We are a group of architects and also philosopher, economists. So the approach is very interdisciplinary, and so the philosophy started from an economical reflection, and then we approached it in different ways. And basically, we try to avoid of building something physically, but we are just approaching the spaces by facilitating the process of the nature and to study the biodiversity in order to recognize the value of the plants, especially the pioneers plants that usually are completely cut inside the public space.
So let's say, given that we have Filippo that knows, let's say, the context, the Italian context very well, he's been working with Riabitare l'Italia since years now, I guess. And I wanted to hear from you, Filippo, what's the experience of, let's say, the Italian territory when it comes to, let's say, revitalization of a certain community. So what are the practices that are involved in that? What's the role of the public and your direct experience? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I prefer, if you want to speak in Italian now, because essentially because I don't know, because I'm not great to speak English now. I don't know if I'm enabled to say all that I want to say today, and then we can start to speak in Italian if you want. Then if you can help.
Yeah, sure.
Perhaps during the conversation I start to speak English too. I don't know. Okay, yeah, I can try a mix. Io sono Filippo Tantillo. Sono stato coordinatore della strategia nazionale delle aree interne, che è una politica pubblica della Presidenza del Consiglio dei Ministri, che esiste dal 2012 a oggi, ancora in piedi. E di cosa parlerò oggi, da quello che ho capito? Sostanzialmente parlerò dei processi di coinvolgimento che non soltanto che abbiamo osservato sui territori, che noi stessi abbiamo messo in atto nel fare queste operazioni, che abbiamo sperimentato. Non la faccio molto lunga. Questa strategia è una strategia che ha degli orizzonti, che sono quelli della lotta allo spopolamento delle aree interne del paese, che però sono degli orizzonti, siccome sono 100 anni che questa parte del paese si spopola, non è una cosa che si fa in 2 anni, no? E anche dopo il Covid questo tema si è integrato fortemente a quello del decongestionamento delle aree eccessivamente congestionate del nostro paese. Perché se le aree interne hanno difficoltà ad accedere ai servizi, altrettanto succede nelle aree troppo congestionate, in cui i cittadini, per motivi opposti evidentemente, non riescono a trovare posti negli asili nido che non sono attrezzati. No? Abbiamo una concentrazione eccessiva di popolazione e invece un'area molto debole.
So he's Filippo Tantillo. He has been the coordinator of the national strategy of the inland area in Italy, and he's a work group, or like it's a project that started in 2012 from the Presidenza del Consiglio, so like one of the main body of the Italian governance. What he would like to speak today related to what is the theme of this conversation. It will be about the process of interaction and involvement of the community, of the communities, because they did this not only as the national inland strategy, that they in their action they did this not so by only observing this process, but also by implementing, by doing, trying to doing something related to this theme. And so for them, there are, as a project, they are, as a strategy, they have obviously different various horizons. One of these is how to kind of fight against the phenomenon of the depopulated area in Italy. And obviously this is something is mainly an horizon, because it's a phenomenon that has been in Italy since 100 years. So it definitely is not something that can be resolved in a short time. It is this, but definitely there is it's important to observe the Italian territory in these two sides. One side is the weak areas that are the inland area, because they are not able to have some services, to have infrastructure, and comparing to some urban areas that are much more, that have some kind of similar, they have the same problem but for opposite reasons. And because there are some, for example, urban centers that are too inhabited, too congested, for example, the families cannot find a place in the nunnery because there is not enough places and they are too full. So how to look at these two kind of same problem, but from these two opposite directions. I'm trying my best.
Sempre per farla breve, gli obiettivi di questa operazione erano vari, no? Erano intanto di conoscenza, bisognava conoscere questo territorio italiano che era sconosciuto, molti anni che non si parlava più di questo. Non c'erano dati statistici, non c'erano studi specifici, non c'erano università dedicate, non c'era nulla. Si trattava di costruire una base dati per capire chi abitava, quanti erano, quali erano le situazioni economiche, cosa stava succedendo. E quindi c'erano degli obiettivi scientifici. Poi c'era una convinzione di fondo. Stiamo parlando alla fine del 60% del territorio nazionale che si spopola, di un'area abitata da 15 milioni di persone, che produce circa il 35% del prodotto interno lordo del paese, quindi non un'area marginale, che può essere trattata marginale. Quindi, secondo obiettivo era quello culturale, portare il tema delle aree interne al centro, o almeno, diciamo, al centro del dibattito nazionale. Guardate che in Italia non ci sono solo le città, c'è questo altro mondo che è molto grande ed è molto importante per il nostro futuro.
So to be to kind of synthesize their main work is they've been, so basically when they started there was not any information, any data, any attention to this area of Italy, to this territory. So since the 2012, the main scientific aims was to collecting data, to study, to knowing what is this territory, who is there, what they're doing, and because at the end the data shows that there is basically the 60% of the Italian territory that is kind of covering that is included in these internal areas, and around the 35% of the economy, the PIL, the product internal, the main production.
PNB.
Yeah, is made in this area, so it's not that marginal at the end of the day, and so the main aim was to bring this topic, to bring these areas back into the cultural debate, of the national debate of Italy, and showing that there are not only cities in Italy?
Ok. I principi ispiratori di questa politica sono due, sostanzialmente. Uno è quello di portare dei nuovi investimenti in quest'area. Oggi la polarizzazione, diciamo, la crescita delle diseguaglianze non è solo sociale, è anche territoriale. Gli investimenti pubblici e privati vanno in pochissimi chilometri quadrati di questo paese. Il centro di Milano, in primis, un po' a Bologna, un po' a Roma, e per il resto, a partire dalle periferie, subito fuori dal muro della città, esistono politiche che siano compensative, come gli stessi bandi, sapete, anche non solo nelle aree interne, ma per intervenire sulle periferie si interviene con bandi, bando periferie, che è già di per sé una politica non ordinaria, no? Un'attenzione. Il secondo pilastro è quello del dialogo sociale. Le politiche moderne oggi e promosse dall'Europa hanno bisogno del dialogo sociale, ossia della partecipazione dei cittadini, non solo per una motivazione di giustizia, ma anche per una motivazione effettiva. Di fatto il centro, la programmazione in questi anni ha investito moltissimi soldi nelle aree interne e la gente va via lo stesso. Qualcosa non funziona. E cosa non funziona? Non funziona il fatto che funziona che la programmazione è fatta male, perché i programmatori non conoscono i luoghi. E bisogna, diciamo, coinvolgere i cittadini nella costruzione delle politiche in maniera non più solo episodica, una volta tanto si consulta la partecipazione a base di una decisione, ma nella costruzione delle politiche, nella loro anche verifica di attuazione.
Sì. So the main two inspirational principles that are driving this work, this strategy, are based on two elements. One is the, let's say, not only the cultural and social injustice, but there is also an injustice in the territory of Italy, because most of the fundings, the public funds are invested in very selected area of the nation, of the country. In particular, we mentioned the center of Milan, a bit Bologna, a bit Rome, but already outside the cities, the perimeter of the cities, is the funding that are gave to this territory are not ordinary, are something that is a bundle in Italy, is a funding application. That's something that is not kind of let's say direct to this territory. And so it doesn't. This is not only a problem with the internal area, actually, it's already with the periphery of the cities. So one of the main principles is to invest in these areas, bringing some fundings here, there, and but the other issue, which is kind of related to the first one, is the missing of a social dialogue. So even if now there is has been some money are being programmed to be invested in these areas, and a lot of money have been already invested, people are still leaving those areas because whoever has made those programs doesn't know very well the territory, didn't participate actively, actually didn't build up the dialogue, didn't build up the politics, the new politics within the community, within the people who live in those places. So it's not only something that has to be, let's say, like as a once in a time we speak with the people or we speak with the communities, but should be something that is built up and is built up from the beginning together. So this is something that still hasn't happened or is a main problem.
Di fatto la cosa nuova che c'era in questa politica, veramente nuova, era che lo Stato, la pubblica amministrazione diceva: noi non sappiamo cosa fare. Cosa facciamo di tutti questi 5.000 centri piccoli? Cosa facciamo del futuro? Quanto conta? Cosa facciamo? Che ne sappiamo noi? Chiediamo in giro. Andiamo a vedere cosa c'è sul territorio. E allora Abbiamo individuato 72 aree in tutto il paese, circa 4 per regione, e su queste abbiamo costruito un team che dallo Stato centrale andava sui territori a sostenere cosa? Le persone, diciamo, l'auto-organizzazione. Avevamo deciso che bisognava pescare dalle esperienze vere, non andare ad aprire i cassetti dei progetti dei sindaci, oppure, ma andare a vedere chi c'era, che faceva le cose, e cercare di rimuovere le difficoltà, mettendosi con un atteggiamento di cura, nel senso, allora a questo punto la parola giusta, cioè di attenzione, di ascolto, forse la maniera migliore per tradurre care, no? In italiano, diciamo, in questo caso. E questi, diciamo, team sono andati con un ruolo, giocando il ruolo dello Stato, cioè una persona che è fuori dalle dinamiche locali, che non è sospettata di essere amico di Dio, di essere, comportando dei giovani ricercatori marziani, mandando antropologi pugliesi a lavorare in Friuli e economisti piemontesi a lavorare in Puglia. Abbiamo fatto questa operazione, diciamo, tutti giovani, diciamo, a seguire le persone, a sostenere, diciamo, non soltanto cercare di dare fiducia, quindi lo Stato andava sul territorio a parlare con quell'uomo, quel piccolo gruppo che faceva quella piccola iniziativa che nessuno si era mai filato, e tu andavi lì, e poi, diciamo, sostenendo, cercando di capire quali erano i problemi, cercando di risolverli, proprio in maniera molto spiccia, soprattutto privilegiando le strategie, come dire, d'attacco, non la difesa di quello che c'è solo. Non difendiamo la scuola prima che chiuda, ma immaginiamo una scuola nuova. Non facciamo crollare il paese, ma immaginiamo una rigenerazione di questo tipo.
No, va bene, sono allenamento degli anni passati. So he said that the very new politics that happened in this process was that the government said, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do with these 5,000 small villages that are around Italy. We don't know. We don't know what can be the future for those villages. So the strategy was to create to go and visit this territory, to go and let's say touch those this context, and so they divided in 72 teams, around four teams for each region, and the idea was to kind of also build a trust with this community, because it was the first time, or anyway, was important that the government decided to go and visit those places, give again some evidence to very small realities that usually no one looking take care of them. Actually, this is how maybe in Italian can be seen, like taking care of, like in this case, the cura, and so the strategy was also to sending this very so all of these professionals that create those teams were interdisciplinary, were like economists, anthropologists, all like young people, but their also way of doing it was more to like mixing up the, let's say, like the background of like the different regions, or maybe someone in Friuli was going in from Puglia, or they were around, and then the importance was that was a strategy of almost attack, not of defense. So it was, we are not waiting that the school is almost closing to find a solution for the school. Let's find a new way. Let's find a new way of creating a school. Like let's create a new way of building up a school. Or we are not waiting that everything kind of collapse in these old towns where the buildings are abandoned. Let's try to renovate in a different way. So this idea of let's say not defending when just the problem is there, but looking at it from another point of view?
Di fatto il nostro lavoro è stato questo: andare sui territori, fare scouting, cercare le persone che si muovono, che provano a muoversi e cercare di affiancarsi a questo. Quali sono le persone? Noi di fatto abbiamo fatto i community makers, cioè quelli che costruiscono, che promuovono delle leadership locali, non avendo nessun ruolo locale. Il nostro ruolo era di supporto nel promuovere i soggetti locali. E abbiamo sostanzialmente sostenuto quei locali che a loro volta erano dei community makers, ossia delle persone che per un motivo o per l'altro si sentivano motivi economici, motivi sociali, motivi politici, sentivano la necessità di ricostruire le comunità nei luoghi che perso, diciamo, in cui la comunità, come struttura anche economica, è andata in crisi, come la prossimità. Allora, sì, quelli che banalmente hanno capito che per fare economia e quindi per sopravvivere nei posti bisogna fare società. Okay. Proprio il grado zero, diciamo, dell'innovazione, possiamo dire. E questa cosa, diciamo, di rifare quindi comunità, noi abbiamo lavorato a sostenere come community maker, a sostenere i community maker locali, come voi, diciamo, come la sfida deve anche essere voi. Questa cosa che poi con il Covid, diciamo, si è mostrata ancora più importante. Nel senso che con il Covid abbiamo visto che un po' di comunità ancora resiste sui territori, di vecchie comunità, cioè di comunità fondata sul mutualismo, sul mutuo aiuto, diciamola così. Okay? Quello strumento per cui quando il Covid, ma anche prima noi l'avevamo visto, durante il terremoto in Centro Italia, mentre lavoravamo nelle aree centrali, arrivò il terremoto e ci spiazzò completamente il nostro lavoro sul territorio. La cosa che abbiamo imparato, e non soltanto noi, che oltre il 90% delle strutture, delle persone, viene messa in salvo da chi è già sul posto e non sono gli aiuti da fuori. Quindi, diciamo, la reazione spesso agli shock, come è stato con il Covid, come è successo con il Covid, per cui si sono riattivati i forni di paese, tutte queste cose, e di comunità è molto, diciamo, rapida. Vengono, come deve essere, parlo da antropologo, no? Nelle comunità primitive in cui in una situazione di emergenza escono dei leader efficaci locali che riescono a tenere insieme le cose e che mettono, diciamo, e c'è questa situazione che poi ovviamente quando arrivano gli aiuti si deprime, no? Diciamo, però tendenzialmente la prima reazione al Covid è stata anche molto positiva, l'abbiamo visto tutti, no? Scusa, mi sto disperdendo questa cosa del Covid, se vuoi possiamo.
So he said that the important element that the main action that they did was to basically, their role was almost, it was like a community makers, but supporting the existing community makers in the territory. So realizing which are the group or the peoples or in the different areas that are already trying to keep the community together within all the difficulty that this territory have, and support them. So give an extra support, and it was even stronger with the COVID because this big shock, let's say, coming like made those small community, this group to kind of react in a very in a sort of sharing and supporting each other, giving mutual help to each other. And this is happened already, for example, also the earthquake in the center of Italy 8 years ago. So so it's basically knowing and emphasize and supporting what those people or those group of people that understand that to keep up a community together, you need to create a society. And
okay. Thank you very much. The last thing, dunque io ora, diciamo, questo è quello che noi abbiamo fatto sui territori. Ora siamo impegnati nel promuovere, a partire da questi oggetti che abbiamo pescato in tutta Italia, con l'ambizioso progetto di promuovere una nuova classe dirigente locale, sul quale, che fa perno anche su queste strutture, sui nuovi centri culturali, diciamo, queste strutture che si pongono quasi come corpi intermedi, si sarebbe detto un tempo, fra società e politica, che sono venuti meno. Oggi, diciamo, l'incomunicabilità con la politica dipende anche da questo. Però su questo io avrei qualche suggerimento, ma forse taccio un po' e passiamo in giro, magari un secondo giro, diciamo.
Sì, so the group recognized that how to support. No, com'era mi sono persa. Sorry. Intermediator. So no, okay. So the idea, the last point that they want to emphasize that now there is a new phase for this project, for this strategy, which is creating a new class of governance, especially starting from the local territory, and to support to support the creation, to create this new form of governance, starting from the new generation, the young generation. They are also trying to support like those places like this one, like Convento, Manifatture, all these places in Italy that are becoming this sort of new mediator or use between politics and the territory, because there is a need of a connection more with the politics, a dialogue with the politics that is still missing.
I have, let's say, a question about this, but I'd like maybe Catherine to, let's say, intervene in a way, because we started with, let's say, local situations. So the work that Stefano and Rossella's carrying on in different, let's say, territories here in Italy. A bigger consultation, which is, let's say, also the national level, and how Filippo and the group of Riabitare d'Italia are working in the national territory. So how to create this intermediation and synergy between local and, let's say, national institutions and governments. Of course, like I personally think that this has to do also with this, let's say, very nature of the territory, of the Italian territory, namely that we are not as centralized as other nations may be. So I would be curious to know, let's say, how, like, what's the role of culture in this context, and how culture is helping in, let's say, helping the territories. So, but we'll keep this for, let's say, our second round, where we can all, let's say, discuss maybe this specific question. But I wanted Catherine to give us, let's say, an idea of, because like she's part of the Care Collective, and is a London-based group which published last year this the Care Manifesto. So I wanted to know from you, Catherine, what were, let's say, the principles and the objectives from which you started, and what are, let's say, the examples, also the concrete examples that, in a way, helped you in defining the Care Manifesto.
Thanks, Giulia. And I just want to say good afternoon. I apologize in advance. I'm at home in a small flat in London. It's one of the last nice days here before it gets gray and rainy. So there's lots of noise in the background. And my family is behind and yelling. So, and I also want to thank Stefano and Rosella and Filippo and Rita because I think that a lot of what you're doing is precisely sort of the translation, or would be the translation of the kind of vision that we present in the CARE Manifesto. And I think it's really interesting for me to hear about what's going on in the Italian context on the micro level. And we can talk about sort of one of the questions that we often get in terms of the CARE Manifesto, which is really is a manifesto, and I'll talk about that in a minute, is okay, so what does that look like? Where do we go from here? And in many ways, you all are giving the answers to that question. So it's not one of the questions that I think I'm going to get, which is good, because really what we did here is a kind of, as Giulia said, is kind of the theory of care and thinking about care. So what I wanted to do, really, what I prepared for this afternoon, was to just share with you some of the ways in which, that the CARE Collective, and I'll talk about how the CARE Collective came to be in a second, tried to imagine a different world, right? So this is a really big endeavor. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to think about a different world in which we could mobilize this moment of global rupture. And all of you have talked about COVID, and this really is in many ways a moment of global rupture, and imagine how we could reorganize our lives, not around what we call in the manifesto a politics of carelessness, but rather around care. And we call our vision in the manifesto is we call it universal care, but it can also be understood. And I like the way Giulia talks about radical care, is because care has in many ways been sort of co-opted by various forces, neoliberal forces, and others. But really, we want to try and think about radical care on a grand scale. So one of the strategies that the CARE Collective was thinking about what we think is crucial in terms of moving forward into a kind of post-COVID world is precisely imagining, and here the culture aspect comes in, and offering progressive alternative narratives of and for the future. And what we came together to discuss is that we really felt that until recently we'd become way too accustomed to dystopic visions. And when I talk to my kids, it's always about the end of the world right now with the environmental catastrophe looming. And so we wanted to try and to think about ways of shifting, and we're drawing on a much longer history, of course. But it was a moment, right, where care suddenly became very important. And so what we did is we wrote the collaboratively authored CARE Manifesto as a kind of political project. It's 5 people, and we wrote it together. And what we tried to do was to offer a more utopian vision of the world of the future. And we call it a feminist, queer, anti-racist, and eco-socialist vision. And so let me just say a few words about the CARE Collective. Basically, it was just a bunch of academics and activists, and we began getting together in a very famous sort of neighborhood commune here in Hackney in London. And it began as a reading group in 2017. We're all involved in various ways in social movements. And we came together because basically we wanted to think about what we saw as the multiple crises of care already engulfing our world. So rising inequality everywhere. The refugee crisis was particularly prominent at that moment. And of course, looming over everything is ongoing climate change and environmental catastrophe. And so this reading group just met for 2 years. We read, we discussed, we debated, and often disagreed. And then we decided that we wanted to write this manifesto, and that became the CARE Manifesto, The Politics of Interdependence. And we began writing in 2019. So we could never have anticipated, how grimly urgent COVID would make our work and the manifesto. And so basically what was there a question? No? Basically what we argue is that and again, we're drawing on many, many theorists and activists, is that the current global crisis in which we now find ourselves is primarily a crisis of care. And it is the result of histories of colonial, imperialist, misogynist, and white supremacist violence, but it's also been compounded now by decades of intensified neoliberal policies, which basically prioritize profit over people. And the other thing that we were thinking about as we went into press with the manifesto, because then COVID had already hit, is what we wanted to argue is that if the pandemic has taught us anything so far, and God, let's hope it has, otherwise we're in serious trouble, is that we are in urgent need of a radically new politics that puts care, again, what we might call radical care, front and center of life. And so we have, and this I think speaks to Julia, your question, we have a few key premises that undergird our vision. One is that building a caring world begins first and foremost by recognizing that our survival and our thriving are everywhere and always contingent on others. So it's this question of interdependencies. So creating any kind of caring alternative involves avowing our mutual interdependencies and also addressing the inevitable ambivalences at the heart of care and caregiving, right? Care, as we talked about in terms of the etymology of the word in English, and I think also if we go back to the Latin, but maybe I'm not a linguist either, has also to do with concern and anxiety. And I think that we need to really take seriously the ambivalences and the complexity of care and caretaking. It's not always so easy or even without aggression. So another key premise that is that only by ensuring that communities, and this goes back to the question of communities, have ample resources in what we call a sharing and thus caring infrastructure. And that's, I think, exactly what you guys are talking about and trying to think about community building. But we also, communities also need to have ample time. And these are the conditions that would create the conditions that render care and a caring disposition toward the other, however distant, ever more possible. So really what the question for us was, what are the conditions that make care possible? And not assume that care is just something that only exists in the world. It needs to be made possible by material infrastructures and psychic infrastructures. So what we do in the manifesto is we draw on past examples and present manifestations of caring possibilities, and we can look at the examples that you gave today, in Convento, and I'm going to pronounce it terribly, I'm sorry, or Manifatture, Knos, I'm sorry, you guys can correct me. But here, if we think about the US context, which is where I was born, Standing Rock, or even in the UK, but also elsewhere across Europe and even the US, the COVID mutual aid organizations that's brought it up, those come to mind as caring possibilities alternatives. And one of the key questions, and this would be a question that we have struggled with and that I would ask all of you in your associations, is then how do we scale up, right? There are so many of these amazing community endeavors, but how do we then scale up? And I think that Filippo spoke a little bit about how that might be possible. So we draw on examples also in terms of scholars and activists and movements such as Black Lives Matter. And what we understand, or what we try and convey, is that we think that care has to be is necessary across different scales of life. But I also want to emphasize that it began as an intellectual exercise. So this is kind of like the macro of the micro that you were all discussing. And we asked ourselves, what would the world look like if the organizing principle were care? And in an effort to then conjure up this world, to imagine this world together, we decided that we wanted to look at different scales. So from the planetary through economies, and the state, to communities, and then to our intimate kinship structures, because we think that these are all crucial in terms of thinking about how, if care were to organize our world. But we begin by diagnosing the interconnected nature of what we call the current reign of carelessness, the politics of carelessness. And what we do is we begin really grandly. We begin from the global dimension and what has produced the climate crisis, and also economies that put profit over people. And then we travel we scale down through to careless states, economies, and communities, to how basically the banality of carelessness affects our interpersonal intimacies, our kinships, our relationships with our friends and our community. So we scale down, but then we travel outward, and we scale up from the interpersonal to the planetary, and in order to outline caring alternatives to our contemporary condition of carelessness. And we use this structure of scales because basically what we wanted to show was how our capacities to care are completely interdependent and can only be cultivated and realized by avowing how these inextricable interconnections that are, you can't care on one scale without having care on another scale. So in a nutshell, and beginning with our most intimate aspects of our lives, our vision translates into reimagining the limits of familiar care, the normative heteronormative family, to embrace what we call more promiscuous models of kinship. And what that means is that we want to think about how we can multiply who we care for and how. The vision also translates into reclaiming forms of genuinely collective and communal life. And here is where the community part comes in, where caring communities are able to prioritize the commons, to create collective public spaces and encourage a sharing infrastructure. And because the roundtable focuses on communities, and you all have been talking about the ways in which working with communities, I'm just going to say a little bit more about what caring communities looks like in the Care Manifesto. So first of all, caring communities obviously don't all look the same, but what we outline is the features that we think are common. We do think that caring communities have certain features that together create what might be called a social infrastructure of care. And so exactly as all of you have been outlining, is that caring communities always involve shared resources. So what we think of when we were writing the manifesto is free public broadband, right? That's how we get connected with other communities, how we move outward. Ubiquitous water fountains, but also sharing not only books through public libraries, but also other things like kitchen hardware, garden tools and toys, all those things that we might use once or twice a year and then throw out. But it also involves shared space by creating more public and green space, cycle lanes, public transport, pedestrian and play streets, parks, and community centers, because all of these facilitate shared activities. And one of the examples that we bring from the past in the Care Manifesto is how the Greater London Council of the 1980s created were really creative in democratizing arts and culture, and in creating community media and festivals which were genuinely diverse. And we could use some of you as examples for other ways of facilitating shared activities. But we can also think about newer forms of municipalism, from Preston to Mississippi to Barcelona, which are facilitating the rebirth of high streets, or main streets, as we say in the US, promoting co-ops and pushing for affordable housing. And they offer, these offer models of what sometimes called community wealth building. But we also, our vision also includes expanding democratic participation and adopting alternatives to capitalist markets. It means insourcing wealth, reversing the marketization and financialization of care infrastructures, and restoring, invigorating, and radically deepening many aspects of our welfare states. But at the same time, thinking about how to rid them of all the racialized policies and the sexual and racial division of labor. So moving to create, to caring states, which we talk about as we move out, what we argue is that caring states requires not only recognition of past atrocities, but also a reckoning with in some form of reparation for those past atrocities, whether we're talking about genocide, slavery, and or dispossession. So it's only by confronting the past and prioritizing the needs of those who have been most marginalized, violated, and negated by uncaring nation states will we be able to move forward into a juster future and cultivate a radically different way of relating to others and to the world itself. And finally, creating a caring world, basically in the manifesto, translates into mobilizing and cultivating a transnational orientation of care toward the stranger, creating porous borders and, of course, the Green New Deal at the transnational level. So I went through this very, very quickly, but basically what we try to do in the CARE Manifesto is to develop a notion of universal care, radical care, whatever you want to call it, which calls for inventive forms of collective care at every single scale of life, but where interdependence is avowed, which is something that's missing now, or has been missing on the political landscape and the discursive landscape for a very long time in terms of neoliberalism's entrenchment and the focus on the individual. And the vision that we offer is one where care is understood as our individual and common ability to provide the political, the social, the material, and the emotional conditions that allow for the greatest possible number of people and living creatures on the planet, along with the planet itself, to thrive. So I'm going to stop there. It's very utopian, and if there are questions, I'm happy to try and address them.
Thank you, Catherine, for the introduction, let's say, to the CARE Manifesto. I don't know if Filippo wants to quickly react on the role of culture, let's say, in this, in Riabitare Italia and in the program, and then we will, let's say, accommodate some questions and leave some space for, let's say, our participants.
Io posso dire una cosa da osservatore sui territori, che quelli che ho chiamato nuovi centri culturali hanno un'altra caratteristica comune, che è quella di considerare la cultura come welfare, cioè un diritto di cittadinanza. Tendono a fare operazioni che abbassano sempre più la soglia di accesso. E questa è una caratteristica comune. Indubbiamente anche un valore, diciamo, la cultura per fare quel passaggio necessario per immaginare il futuro del paese e delle aree interne, ma anche del paese, di tutto quanto. Che è appunto un aspetto, diciamo, un po' visionario che si può avere nella cultura, cioè la capacità di ragionare non solo sui bisogni, ma anche sui desideri. La centralità del desiderio è importantissima, soprattutto per delle aree considerate depresse, che sono vittime di una trappola dei bisogni. Sembra che oltre al bisogno non si possa fare nulla. Sui bisogni si costruisce ben poco, in realtà. Sulla voglia di cambiamento, e quindi anche di ragionare, di riflettere, di immaginare, allora la cultura gioca un ruolo centrale.
So he said that the new cultural centers that Filippo mentioned before are actually have another important characteristic, which is based on the cultural welfare. So the culture not as a right, as a right for the citizen, and it's something that is very important, especially in those, let's say, let's marginal kind of leftover areas, because it's something that is built on not only on the needs but on the wish. So how it's important to bring the wish of a community back to the center, and starting to create, imagine a change, a new vision, not only based on the fact that on the kind of trap of the need, but of what someone wished to change, basically. And the culture brings mainly the way of approaching this wish. Io ve lo spiace.
Thank you, Rita, also for translating.
I hope you're not taking much. I'm really trying to.
No, it's better than me.
No.
That was great. Thank you, Rita.
And I think there are questions from, let's say, the participants over there.
I think there was someone from Facebook, no?
Yeah.
And then no, there is one here, Daniele. But
parlato tanto di cura a livello sociale, di gruppi, un po' macro e anche un po' dal mio punto di vista in maniera astratta, no? E mi piacerebbe sapere dai partecipanti se ci sono anche delle esperienze più diciamo, incorporate di cura anche soprattutto per quanto riguarda gli individui all'interno delle organizzazioni che si occupano di cura stessa, no? Perché voi erogate dei servizi a un territorio, però se la cura non nasce dall'interno delle organizzazioni, no? Dai rapporti di potere all'interno, dal lavoro, dalle economie, eccetera, no? Secondo me non si può estendere. Quindi mi piacerebbe sapere da voi se ci sono se avete degli esempi in questi progetti.
should I translate the question?
I didn't really hear the question.
I repeat. Faccio una versione sintetica, posso? So he's asking to the participant to this table that or this conversation that he had during this conversation was a lot of talking about cure, about care, but in his point of view, maybe it's more abstract in a more abstract way. So he's asking to participant to if in their experience they've been noticed or they've been found an example of care that it started internally in the territory. So like, okay, there is we want, or the talk was about bringing care to these territories, bringing attention, but then there is an example of this care is coming from the inside. I don't know, it's open to all.
So I can say something.
Yeah.
So from my point of view in Manifatture Knos, the first way of giving care to the people that are using the space and to taking care of the space is to carry a lot of responsibilities on few people that are then not managing the space for themselves, but to make it accessible for them, for different organizations and people that are using the space in the way that they are contributing in relationship to the way that they can do it. So we are not asking something that is very specific, that there are not so many agreements related to rent. It's more how can you contribute to the survival of the space? And sometimes for them it's also difficult to deal with it, but even if it's not possible for them, we are welcoming them, and we are still working with them every day. So then there is another dimension for me related to the topic of care, that it's related to the common space. So when as a huge community we are able to taking care of the common space instead of giving attention just to our specific activities inside the space, we are able to support each other and to be also protagonists inside the space. So it's like to taking care about the space, it's to feel you, to make you inside it, not as an audience, but as a part of the project, and so you can deal with it in the way that you are supporting it. So it's more related to the topic of engagement and related to the work. Yeah, we are not able to to engage people for working, but we are still in the condition of surviving and trying to go on by growing little by little. So I don't know if it's clear and if I answer to the question.
So, I just want to say something because it's very related. It's happening these days. Like we started this project. We started to collaborate with this group of young guys around 20s from Amantea, which is the main village around around this area, Mediterranean coast. Especially two of them, they're, I don't know, I don't want to be in cliche, but like they finish school, they never really went, they don't know what to do, they are actually just going around with a motorbike, they don't have any, and since they came here in this week and meet other people from outside, they met Giuseppe, they learned how to make this garden, whatever, they started to ask me, should we do it in Amantea? Should we do it in the big garden that the municipality owns it? And that's what, I mean, maybe we're never gonna do it because it's a lot of energy already to do one thing. Yeah, but if they want to do it or they take the tools to do it because they met these people, then maybe it's something that maybe that doesn't come from them. So it's not internal, but it's almost like sleeping inside everyone. And then as soon as you see someone doing it, then you starting maybe to taking care of your own place in a way, which, yeah, especially I feel it like at least in Amantea or Calabria, after I moved in these last 2 years, I think needed a lot around this age. It's the reason why I left when I was 18, and maybe other people can't, but then if we bring some example, then they might change as well, not change, they make the wish that Filippo was talking about. Stefano?
Sì, no, aggiungo perché chiaramente si apre, cioè, il pensiero, no, sull'azione, come dire, chiamiamola sociale culturale che mettiamo in atto, un po' in tutta Italia, cioè è cambiato il punto di vista, o meglio è tornato secondo me una connessione perché negli anni 60-70 alcune compagnie teatrali, quali l'Odin o altre, cioè, che hanno lasciato le città, in questo caso venivano dalla Danimarca, e hanno girato il mondo facendo questi baratti. Cioè il baratto, per come era una pratica dell'Odin Theatre, insomma del terzo teatro, di Grotowski e via dicendo, era portare qualcosa e farsi dare qualcosa dalla comunità e in questo scambio creare appunto una relazione. Cioè, secondo me il concetto di cura, insomma, prima diceva chiamiamola come vogliamo, basta che ci stiamo con le persone e creiamo con le persone e sviluppiamo insieme alle persone. Ancora di più oggi è diventata una necessità dell'azione proprio culturale, trovare i modi perché le persone siano più coinvolte e siano più partecipi, come appunto parlava anche Rossella, insomma, prima. Cioè, renderli protagonisti, che sembra uno spot elettorale, prendiamoci, però effettivamente è proprio questo, cioè, provare a fare cioè volersi bene o la dico come va detta, cioè amarsi, cioè proprio cioè l'amore, no? Come veicolo di creazione di relazioni che hanno una finalità, diciamo, che creano un benessere appunto.
Stefano said that to add what was our answer to Daniele, that it's important to you think that a need or anyway an approach is coming back in our society nowadays, which is maybe was already present in the 60s, 70s, for example, in theater companies, that they were going around around the different communities and having this barracks. So I give you something, you give me something, and this allowed in this change, in this exchange between people, then there is creating a relationship. So it's important to bring back this, to make people like kind of again protagonists, and to love each other, and then using the love or not using maybe is not the right word, but see the love as the vehicle for creating this as a vehicle of a change, of a creating of a community.
I think in a way, the pandemic played a role in the last 2 years, because, sorry, it started to rain. I hope it's not, let's say, disturbing the conversation. But I have a feeling like really the pandemic helped some of us that were not really aware of that before, understanding that space can be, let's say, hacked, and let's say spaces flexible and waiting for us to, let's say, reflect our needs on it. So especially in, for example, public space, we saw in the last months pop-up cycling lanes and all this new infrastructure that popped up really, let's say, somehow, let's say, easily. I don't know if the municipalities that adopted that measure really agree with me, but let's say the ability that we had in this last months to adapt our spaces to this new, let's say, paradigm made something change also in everyone's mind, I think, like trying not to, let's say, accept, let's say, what is happening, like the dynamics that defined our everyday, let's say, habits. So I think like the pandemic really played a role in the way we perceive our same role in society, and maybe there is more of an effort for each individual to be part of, let's say, the community and play an active role in that. I see Stefano has to leave. Thank you for joining. We will be closing the session very soon, but it was really a pleasure to have you here, Stefano. Have a good day. And so I don't know if you had the same feeling, and like to me, this notion of, let's say, an individual being able to, let's say, reflect their desires, as Filippo said, in space, it's something that has arrived to a different, let's say, level of conscience. I don't know if you
can I jump in?
Yes.
And so I think that I partially agree with you, and partially I would I mean, I think that one of the things that we saw was that the unexpected sudden, or the something that we never thought could happen happened, at least in our lifetime, where all of a sudden, we were stuck, at least in many countries, in our houses, and how quickly things could change. So I think that there were different reactions, and one was these mutual aid organizations, where people who are not agentive, they weren't active in community, all of a sudden became active in community building. And yet there's also the other side, which is the fear, right? Which is the despondency and the ways in which the COVID has created sort of this increased loneliness, where people are stuck in homes or cut off from. So I think it can go both ways. And this is the question, this is why it is a kind of rupture, and where we see that, things that we never thought possible are possible, where governments could come in, even the most neoliberal governments could pour money into the economies. In the UK, massive amounts of money. Ultimately, we realized they went to private companies, but things can change, and they do change, and individuals can make a difference. But there's also the flip side of that, And the other thing that I would say is that I think spaces are more complicated. It's not just that spaces exist and we reflect upon them, but we create them. And we saw that too in communities, where the communities, I think, and what I've been hearing from Rosella and from Stefano and from Filippo and also Rita, is that it's about how do we cultivate a sense of agency in order to help communities or become part of the community in order to build them as caring spaces. And so spaces are not just reflective of, but they can be created by communities, and that's what's happening on all these different levels.
I don't know if there are any other questions or reactions on at Belmonte or Belmondo. And then I think we can, like, we really took advantage, let's say, of your time, of the guests.
Te l'ho girata, Giulia, I think. The question was from Facebook.
Okay, this is a question coming, like it's for Catherine, but I think like everyone there can have an answer about this. Community building is difficult to quantify in terms of return on the investment. It doesn't fit in the neoliberal sense of long-term strategy, 5 to 7 years. It's a generational strategy taking 20 years, I would say at least. If there is a need to fit in the investment/funding system. How do you find we can do that? I think this comes from the organizational specific.
Not sure, I mean, how to scale up? Is that basically the question?
Yeah, I think so.
That's the question. How do we, and I don't have an answer for that, but I think that one of the major challenges for all of these community organizations, and here maybe Filippo can talk a little bit about, because the relationship to governing structures and how we, you know, a lot of the different community organizations are local and ultimately are unsustainable because volunteers or you're burnt out after a while. So the question is, how do we create the resources? And they have to be both at the national and also at the local level, so that these initiatives are actually not only scaled up, but sustainable over time. And that's the question for a lot of these community organizations, like mutual aid organizations. They're, you know, they sprouted up, they were amazing, but they were responding to a crisis. And how do you then, I mean, the example that in the CARE manifesto is how the NHS began as a local initiative and how that was eventually scaled up. So it is possible, and there are examples of how that's done. But at the current moment, I think we all need to think together about how these particular community organizations can scale up the amazing work that they're doing so that they're both sustainable and well-resourced. And maybe Filippo, you can talk a little bit about your experiences with with government in terms of.
Yeah, I think that Filippo, with the work they're doing at Riabitare l'Italia, has an idea, let's say, of how to quantify, let's say, the activity of an association or a group of community makers in a territory.
Spiego un attimo, traduco.
Volevo sapere, diciamo, qual è la maniera di valutare, diciamo, l'efficacia di quello che si è fatto in termini di ritorno di investimento fatto?
No, più che altro come si fa, dato che non sono dei valori, soprattutto nella nostra società neoliberale, che hanno una value tangibile, perché comunque sono magari lavori che ci vogliono anche 20 anni per essere più tangibili. Allora come si fa però a far sì che ci siano degli investimenti, cioè come fai quindi a trovare gli investimenti in qualche modo se non hai questa tangibilità da riproporre? Penso che di base anche rispetto un po' a queste piccole realtà dove magari spesso è difficile riuscire a portare appunto dei dati quantificabili in modo...
Io dico come la vedo io, è molto difficile, no? Una risposta chiara è molto difficile, però secondo me non c'è che una risposta radicale in qualche maniera. Non è possibile applicare il sistema costi-benefici, così come è pensato adesso, a una valutazione di un intervento di questo genere. e sarà sempre perdente, sempre, sempre. È inutile, non pensiamo che questo possa succedere. Può succedere in due maniere: o invece di prendere il prodotto interno lordo si prendono altri sistemi per valutare, e ci sono tanti tentativi, no? Il BES, come si chiama, l'indice, diciamo, di qualità della vita, quale cosa significa, come aumenta. Oppure si dà anche la capacità di valutare ai cittadini. Una piccola operazione molto tattica che abbiamo fatto sui territori per conquistare la fiducia delle persone con cui andavamo a lavorare era fare delle piccole operazioni molto che avessero un impatto visibile ma non economico, non immediatamente economico. Eravamo lo Stato, potevamo andare in Lombardia, mettere insieme 3 nord, insieme al piccolo comune, insieme alla scuola, e finalmente organizzare gli orari perché i ragazzi andassero a scuola senza alzarsi alle 5 e tornare alle 6, ma semplicemente questa operazione non la poteva fare nessuno. Dopodiché noi lo siamo riusciti a farla, abbiamo restituito in orario. La nostra valutazione è stata così: quante ore di vita hanno risparmiato i ragazzi con questa operazione che è costata 20.000 euro, che era soltanto spostare una paralina da una parte all'altra e cambiare gli orari. Allora, in questa maniera noi siamo riusciti, però è tutto da costruire questo sistema di valutazione. Però la valutazione dei cittadini, perché partecipazione non è solo consultazione, significa individuare con i cittadini gli obiettivi che si vogliono raggiungere e valutare con loro se sono stati raggiunti. Un investimento, per esempio la costruzione di una rotatoria per strada, scusate se sono così, che permette ai ragazzi che vanno a ballare di non schiantarsi tutti i sabati sera, perché io mi sono trovato a occuparmi di questi problemi molto piccoli, perché c'è stata indicata dalla cittadinanza che erano preoccupati come priorità del fatto che questi ragazzi partivano la sera, andavano in Abruzzo, ad Avezzano. Quindi si decide di fare questa operazione, di fare una rotatoria, e non fu valutata in base ai costi, ai benefici, ma fu valutata in base al numero, alla riduzione del numero di ricoveri al pronto soccorso il sabato sera. No? Quindi fu dato allo strumento ai cittadini per valutare quello che era stato fatto. Questa è un'altra strada possibile.
I will synthesize for Catherine. Filippo said that obviously it's very difficult. This can be the more clear and direct answer, but to be definitely it's very hard. It's very difficult to evaluate this type of action within the existing system between cost and benefits. So this, in order to do that, something has to change. And the way that they, an example, a more practical example that they have been testing with experiment with the strategy was to give voice to the an analysis also with these citizens. So asking them what they need and how to value those. So for example, once they organize within so they were the state, the government with the small municipalities, and they decided to change to move a bus stop and to change to a timetable of a bus, and this allowed the young people from this very kind of this marginal area to arrive at school without getting up like 3 hours before. And so the value can be seen in then maybe not in cost or whatever, but in more like how many hours those young guys, young girls had to have improved in their life because of not waking up and waiting for 3 hours. And the same as in another village with the cities, in the problem that came up was that they were worried about young people going to the club and having some accidents. So they decided to build a roundabout, a roundabout, and so to evaluate this was not the cost of this roundabout, but how many how many people was then going to the hospital on Saturday night? How many less people were going to the hospital? So this kind of value obviously can be seen as a way of approaching this action, but obviously is a system that needs to be created. It's not there yet.
Cioè la valutazione deve essere molto più orientata ai risultati, non alla spesa dei risultati. Quella cosa uccide, no? Agli outcomes e non agli output, come si dice tecnicamente.
So the value should be more focused on the results and how they're not on how much the result or how much or the cost of getting to a result.
I mean, the whole idea of cost benefit is precisely within the neoliberal economic agenda, and we have to completely get away from that. And that was part of the CARE manifesto, is precisely diverting the discussion around investment or benefit for investment and thinking about what would be best for the community. I mean, it's as simple as that. So we have to get away from this cost benefit equation. Otherwise, I think we're doomed, as we see with the ways that how it's manifesting itself in terms of climate. I mean, it's just so I'm sorry, I have to go.
We are for everybody, since they have a whole program for today, and I don't want to.
We still we need to move to another place to have lunch and then coming back here later. But
Catherine, I really hope there will be the chance for you to visit Belmonte, and see you soon. Ciao.
Ciao,
Ciao.
Filippo, Rossella, grazie. Grazie mille, ci sentiamo prestissimo.
Grazie, thank you. Ciao,
Ciao.
Ciao.
Dov'è?